Last time we worked on the first two words, Bereshis Bora. And now I want to pick up a little bit further down, but let's read what comes in between. The second verse describes the situation. The Eretz was Tohu and Vohu, which roughly means something like formless, something which is fluid, not with a clear, distinct contours, not with clear, distinct categories of different items. If you know some science and you want, you could think of it similarly to an original ball of energy before even particles coalesced out of the energy. And darkness was on the face of the deep. Now, we naturally think of darkness as simply the absence of light. But that's not the understanding of our texts. In particular, the verse from Isaiah that we mentioned the other day, that's in the beginning of the Siddur after Baruch Hu, it starts off by saying, Yotzer Or Uvari Choshech. God formed light and created darkness. You don't create the absence of light, just don't turn on the light. So, Choshech, whatever Choshech refers to, what kind of thing it is a thing in and of itself. It was on the face of the deep, whatever that is. The Ruach Elokim, which either is the wind or breath of God, is hovering over the waters. So there are waters there. As we pointed out last time, we don't have any words describing that God created this. In Isaiah, it says he created it, so he did create it, but here it's not mentioned. That's not part of the story. And then he said, let there be light, and there was light. So the first thing whose creation that we get explicitly mentioned in the text is light. And then it says, God saw that the light was good and separated between the light and the darkness. So let me ask you a question. If he created it and then separated the light from the darkness, where did he create it? He must have created it together with the darkness. That's why it needed to be separated afterwards. So if it needs to be separate, if it's important and right that it be separate, then why didn't he create it separate? Why create it mixed with the darkness and then separate it out? And indeed, you've certainly heard that there are 6 days of creation and different things were created on each of the different days of creation. If God wanted all those things to exist, why didn't they just all come into existence at the same time? All of these procedures, all of these creations and then actions of adding features or modifying the circumstances are meant to teach us something. And not because he has any limitations. In this particular case, and when I say it's meant to teach us something, when I describe what it's supposed to teach, I don't mean this and only this. I don't even mean that when I say this, we really understand what I'm saying. I'm just giving you an example. It means there are two possibilities. There's a possibility of light and darkness mixed together, and there's a possibility of them being separate. In the subsequent history of the world, there are going to be periods of light and darkness mixed together, and periods where they're separate. And not only in the history of the world, but in the development of human beings' life, and different periods of life go through periods of both types. And it's an important process to separate them out. When you are confronted with them as mixed together, it's important for us to work to separate them out. Not to simply deal with them mixed, because if you deal with them mixed, you don't have a clear picture of what you're doing. And indeed, You have certainly heard of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Usually that's understood as a kind of elliptical compound. Tree of knowledge of good and evil really means the tree of knowledge of good and of knowledge of evil. That's where you usually take it. There are two things to know about, good and evil. The tree provides you with knowledge of both. But there are those who say that it means it's a tree of knowledge of good and evil, mixed. And that's what they weren't supposed to eat. They weren't supposed to have that. Because before that, the upside, the downside were separate. Maimonides talks about this at great length in the second chapter of the guide. And it was clear to them the difference between them. And by not eating from the tree of knowledge, they lost that clarity. It was a big step down. It was a deterioration. Because now their picture of the world was blurred and boundaries weren't clear. And they had to deal with a new reality. And the original plan was that they shouldn't have to deal with that reality. They'd be able to see things clearly and make distinctions and make decisions clearly. So this idea here that there's a process of separating out is very important. That's one point. And then the Zohar makes another remark. Leis, Nahora, go chashucha. There's only light that comes from darkness. All light comes from darkness. The scenario starts with the darkness present. And there's no light at all. And then the light is created within the darkness, and then it's separated out of the darkness. This becomes a pattern. All light coming into the world is preceded by a darkness. Revelation at Sinai is preceded by slavery in Egypt. The births of all of the patriarchs and matriarchs from Abraham on, but within the family, were all from people who were barren. Some of you know from the stories of the mothers that they were barren, but our oral tradition tells us that the fathers were barren also. Abraham and Sarah were married for decades with no children. The children came into existence after a period of barrenness, where no children could come into existence. This is a recurring theme. And this is where the theme is originally projected into the world. So when we read about creation, it's not just history. It's also the planting of themes that continue to exist in the world, and therefore they teach us how to deal with our world as well. I don't know if you've heard of cosmic inflation. It's not just the fact that the Iranian rial is like 6,000 to $1 or whatever it is, some gigantic number. Alan Guth in 1980 created something to work with the Big Bang. And one explanation of it is that there are Big Bangs going on all the time. It wasn't just once. New sub-universes are coming into existence all the time because the Big Bang process is a continual process. So when we talk about the Big Bang, according to him, that's just understanding something that's still going on, not something that just once was in history. All of the things that we have recorded in our history are like that. They're all precedents for processes that continue to go on. So when you study them, you also study how we have to look at the similar processes in our own lives. Okay, now we come to the fifth verse, and here I'm going to tell you what the Talmud says about the verse. And I want to illustrate a theme, which I think is an extremely important theme. Very often you become acquainted with what the oral tradition says about a verse. Sometimes you look at the verse and you look at what the oral tradition says, and it's very hard to figure out how they connected that thought with the verse. What is it in the verse that motivated them to say it? It is hard to figure out, but there's always an answer. They never simply arbitrarily attached an idea to a verse. I've been saying this for decades, but now just Rabbi showed me that the Maharal says it in his commentary on the Agadah of Baba Basra, always there's something in the verse that provokes the rabbinic comment. Maybe you could imagine that the rabbinic comment didn't have to be this type of comment, it could be a different comment, but never is there simply no connection whatsoever. Always the verse needs something, and the rabbinic comment supplies something that does the job. So here's the verse. I'll read it to you, and I'll tell you the rabbinic comment, and then we'll go to work and see if we can figure out how the verse invites this comment. The last verse 5 says, God called to the light day and to the darkness. Now, in English it says he called, but there's no he in the Hebrew. So I'm going to read it the way it's written in the Hebrew. God called to the light day, and to the darkness called night. That's what it says. The rabbinic comment is, God doesn't associate his name with evil. God doesn't associate his name with evil. Really, it looked like it was talking about light and dark and calling them day and night. First of all, how do good and evil get in here? And second of all, he's associating his name. Let's suppose we have a simple sentence. John went to the store and bought milk. Who bought milk? John, right? I mean, that's not a problem. Obviously, it's a compound sentence. It has a subject, and the subject applies to both halves of the sentence. Would there be any reason to say, look, John's name is associated with going to the store, but it isn't associated with buying the milk? Of course it is, because it's a compound predicate, and John's the subject. Why would you say that God's name was associated with one more than the other? So it's very hard to put together what the rabbinic comment is coming from. So let's do it piece by piece. Is there anything on the page here that would indicate that light is associated with good and darkness is associated with evil? Anything on the page?
God saw that the light was good.
Well, let's start with that. God saw that the light was good. I mean, that certainly associates the light with good. That's right on the surface. Now, when God saw that the light was good, what else was on stage? What other items are there in the environment other than the light?
Darkness.
Well, certainly the darkness. The darkness there in verse 2. So you got to imagine, here's the stage. It has light on it, darkness, and maybe some other things. And now it says, and God saw that the light is good. Does that have any implications about the darkness?
It implies that it's clearly not, it's definitely not as good as the light.
It's definitely not as good as the light, because then he would have said, he saw the light and darkness were good. Why would you pick out one to say and not the other one? It's like one teacher once said to me, he was talking about the students in the class. Richard always has good things to say in class, and his homework's always home in time, and his answers on the tests are concise and are accurate. And Tom always arrives on time. Did the teacher say anything bad about Tom? Well, yes and no. Not verbally, but by juxtaposing him with Richard and giving all this praise to Richard and only saying that Tom comes on time, it means that Tom doesn't get all the rest of the praise. So for sure, the light is good and the darkness is at least not as good. Okay, that's one thing. Now let's talk about the compound. Let's go back to verse 4. God saw the light was good, and God separated between the light and the darkness. What do you see there? The name is there twice, right? It's there twice. But isn't the compound sentence both times about God? So why didn't it write, God saw that the light was good and separated between the light and the darkness? Why didn't it write that? Why did it repeat the name God? Didn't need it, right? Now I have to ask, well, in 4, God is repeated, and in 5 it isn't. Back to back. So that means something. And the rabbinic comment is, well, 4 comes first, and then 5 leaves one out. Why does it leave one out? Because God doesn't want his name associated with the darkness. So he left it out. That's not so bad, the way the verse is actually written. Right? There's certainly place to make the rabbinic comment, given the literal reading of the verse. Okay. I was mentioning this to my oldest son, I don't know how many years ago it was. He said, yeah, but Abba, turn over the page, look at page 5, and look at verse 10. God called to the dry land earth, and to the gathering of waters called seas. One instance of God, compound, both callings. Are you going to tell me that the earth is good and the seas are bad? So I said, that's a good question. I thought about it for a while, but then I began to accumulate certain associations, and I heard later in the name of Rabbi Shapiro, Zichrono Livracha, that he said exactly that. Let's talk about waters for a little while. What was the situation of the globe when it was first created? It was covered with water everywhere. That's why on day 2, the waters had to be drawn off and the dry land appeared. The seas, as localized on the globe and leaving room for it, took place afterwards. So, and dry land is where people live. If the globe had remained covered in water, there was no place to live. So the sea was sort of in the way of the future creations, in particular places for people to live. Now, there was a period in history where people deteriorated and became degraded, and it was corrected by a giant flood, right? Where almost everybody died. The instrument of destruction of the population was water. And then when the Jews left Egypt and the Egyptian army was chasing them and attacking them, they escaped by crossing a body of water which was in the way, which had to be split so that they'd be able to go across and escape the Egyptians. And when the Jews, a generation later, came to enter the land of Israel, what was in the way was the Jordan River. So the river had to be stopped so as to let them cross. You see that water sort of gets in the way, prevents things, destroys things, right? And then there are verses in Psalms which talk about the water wanting to reconquer the land. You could think of tsunamis if you like. And that the seashore holds back the water from wanting to conquer the land. So that a lot of references with respect to seas, not water in a cup, not rainfall, not the rainfall that we have for agriculture, but the seas particularly. There's a lot of literature which creates, and so I said to him after a while, I said, yeah, that's right. Verse 10 is parallel to verse 5 and has exactly that connotation. Now, there's one more feature of verse 5 that I want to point out to you, which supports this analysis. Back to verse 5. Literally, verse 5 says, God called to the light day, and to the darkness called night. Suppose someone says, look, Rabbi, don't bother me with verse 4 and verse 10. I'm telling you the reason why the word God appears once in verse 5 is economy. We're paying this scribe letter by letter, it's less letters. Pay him less. We don't have to repeat it to make the sentence make sense. So just less, that's all. It's just economy. Verse 4, I'll talk about it another time. In the meantime, I'm telling you, verse 5, it's economy. That's wrong. And you can prove it. What in verse 5 proves to you that it's not economy?
gathering of the waters equals sea.
I'm sorry, we're talking about verse 5 now.
Is this not verse 5? Oh, sorry. No, I'll take it off.
Yeah, you're okay.
Then it says 1 day.
I didn't get to that. I didn't mention that. Just the first part. Just the first part that we read. God called to the light day, and to the darkness called night.
Right, that day comes first. Light comes first.
Why would that show that it's not economy being the reason why this word God isn't repeated? How would that interact with the idea of economy?
Maybe we left out kara.
Yeah, the verb is repeated. In the first two halves of the sentence, it's the same verb. So it could have written, God called to the day, to the light day, and to the darkness night. It doesn't repeat called. It did repeat called. And it didn't repeat the name. So it's not efficiency, it's not economy. It's specifically not to repeat the name. That's pretty tight. So this is the spirit in which you look at the things that the rabbis comment, and you analyze their remarks that way. Where it says that God separated between the light and the darkness, so Rashi comments that according to the Pshat, what did God see when he saw that it was good? He saw that it was good, and because it was good, it's not appropriate that they should be functioning together in a combination. In other words, if you separate A from B, you could have a lot of different reasons. Maybe A will flourish and B will both will flourish separately. Or maybe if they're together, they'll be mutually destructive, and you're just trying to save them. Here it's one-sided. It's because A is better separated from B, they separated from B. It's not better for B, it's better for A. That means the two parts of the verse go together. God saw that the light was good, and because he saw it was good, he saw that it should be separated. Now, we have a very interesting asymmetry. What would you call light and darkness mixed together? Do we have a name for that in English? Evening or twilight. Right? When the sun has gone down, but there's still light in the atmosphere, and you can see fairly well, not very well, but fairly well. We don't go from daytime to nighttime abruptly. We don't go abruptly. But the halacha is not like that. The halacha is not like that. In the evening, we go from daytime to a period called Ben Hashmashos, intermediate, and for Ben Hashmashos we go to nighttime, and the intermediate period is a period which has aspects of day and night. And in halacha, it's not really day, it's not really night, it's something else. It's an intermediary. It's called a suffix, but the word suffix has to be explained. That's what it is. In the morning, you don't have that. In the morning, when the first substantial light appears, it goes instantaneously from nighttime to daytime. Which means that the intermediary in the evening isn't because of the physical reality, because the physical reality in the evening and the morning is exactly the same. You go from, in the morning, from uniformly dark to little by little more and more light until the sun rises. And the evening, the sun goes down, and you go from less and less light to darkness. So the transition is the same kind of transition. One is increased, one is decreased. It's the same kind of transition. And halachically, they're treated entirely differently. Here, you had the original going from nighttime to daytime. That's where the separation was made. And indeed, going from nighttime to daytime in halacha is an absolute separation. Yes, physically there's more and more light coming into the atmosphere, but halachically it's night and then becomes day instantaneously. On the other hand, so that also teaches you that in our rhythm, it's a different reality. And part of that reality is, as you probably know, that we count days in the evening. The new day starts in the evening. So that's the transition between date and date. The 5th of Teves to the 6th of Teves. That takes place in the evening. That's a big transition. There's an intermediary. In the morning, you're going from the dark time of the date to the light time of the date, but it's the same date. The transition is made differently. Actually, it's even more complex than that, but I'm not going to go into it right now. Let's leave it. So that's already one feature. Now, let's see if I do this. Yes. Then comes at the very end of verse 5, there was evening, there was morning, one day. Okay, now let's just do a little comparative reading, skipping over the in-between. Look at the next page to verse 8. There was evening, there was morning, a second day. Verse 13, and evening and morning, there was a third day. 19, evening and morning, a fourth day. 23, evening and morning, a fifth day. Do you see a discontinuity here? How did we start? One day. Is that how you count? 1, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th? Should have been either 1, 2, 3, or 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, right? In our language, this difference between ordinal numbers and cardinal numbers. Ordinal numbers are 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th because they imply an order. And cardinal numbers tell you the multitude. What is the multitude? You have 6 apples on the table, not 6 apples on the table. 6 tells you how many, and 6th tells you where it is in an order. So really, it ought to have been first, because we're talking about the order of the days. And here, the rabbinic comment, I think, is really philosophical. How do you say first? If you have just one, is there anything in your reality at this moment which would explain calling it first? If there's only one, first is a relationship at least to another one which is second. First means before the second. If there is only one, there's absolutely no meaning to calling it first. So on day one, you don't have any reality which justifies the ordinal number first. On day two, there's a day before, and this one comes now, so it's second. And the subsequent numbers are justified by the previous days. But here there's no previous day. So here the simple meaning of the text is that you don't have a justification for an ordinal number. And then the thought is, well, then what is it describing? You can think of it as a name, as a term for the day, but also it can be understood as the day of one when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was one. Yeah.
I agree with the interpretation, but I also am curious, like, what? I think you could probably call it, like, if one person enters a race and they finish the race, they got first, they also got last. But I still feel like you would say that they got first place.
But that's because there were other runners.
No, if they're the only person who entered the race. So it was just them, they finished.
Why would you call it first? I don't think you would.
No?
How do you call it a race?
Well, if no one else showed up, for instance. Like,
Yeah, okay, but
one person signed up.
then he's running for time. That's all. Okay, but then calling it first, I don't think you would do that.
Would you give, if there was a trophy, if they had like first, second, third place trophies, would they just not give them the?
Maybe they would, but it wouldn't mean the same. It wouldn't mean the same thing.
Sure.
You know, it's very interesting. I'll tell you. My oldest son, at a certain point in his life, pointed out something with, I think Shem Shmuel says it. We think of the oldest child as somehow the first one in the family and prominent, and we sometimes associate accomplishment with the oldest child. But in the history of the Jewish people, it doesn't work like that. Almost no one who was great was the first child in his family. Abraham was not the first. Isaac was not the first. Jacob was not the first. Yehuda, who became the forerunner of the kings, is not the first. Levi, who became the forerunner of the priesthood, is not first. In terms of the father, Joseph is not first. Moses wasn't first. That doesn't mean that Aaron and Miriam were trivial, but they couldn't compare to Moses, and he wasn't first. King David wasn't first. Solomon wasn't first. It's like really quite a consistent run of the first one not being the top of the ladder. Someone, when I was saying this over, said to me, "What about Samuel?" Well, he was his mother's only child. So, was he first? Well, if he was first, he was also last. Right? So that first doesn't count because it doesn't distinguish it from something else. Right? So if you're the only child, you don't call him the firstborn. You call him the only one, which is one, not first. First is always a relationship to other things. I think that's what's that's this, in simple terms. That's what's going on here. Okay, so now here's another thing. Let's take a look at verse 6 on page 5. God said, "Let there be a firmament." No, the word firmament means absolutely nothing at all. There's something there called a rakia in the midst of the waters. And let it separate between water and water. Okay, there's a thing there. There's waters, there's a thing there, and there's waters above and water below. So God made the firmament and separated between the waters which were beneath the firmament and the waters which were above the firmament. Doesn't it say the same thing twice? There's a thing in the midst, and it separates between water and water. So you know, some is above and some below, and that's how they're separated. And 7 says the same thing over again. So listen to what Maimonides says. Maimonides says, the first water that you read about in verse 2 that was there, and it doesn't say that God created it, wasn't H2O. It was something else. And it filled a certain area, and then, first of all, God made a firmament and separated the above from the below, and then the ones that what was above he made into some substance, and what was below he made into some substance, and what's below, the H2O, is what he made it into. You can call the original stuff proto-water. It was the thing out of which below the firmament H2O was made, and above the firmament something else was made, and the firmament itself, the oral tradition says, was made out of that proto stuff. So the original stuff became 3 separate things, each with its own character. So now, our picture has to be that there's something called the firmament, and below it is H2O, and above it is something else, and all were made out of this proto-water to start with. What could the stuff above be? I saw one writer who, this book goes back 20 years, I think, was trying to do the job with the best tools that he had. He said, well, if you take a look at the asteroid belt, many of the asteroids are made of ice. And if you calculate the amount of water, sum total of water in the asteroids, it's equal or more than the sum total of water on the surface of the Earth. And that's certainly above. So you could say that the water in the asteroids is, but that's also H2O. He wasn't citing Maimonides for that. But what about dark energy? Dark energy. That's what's driving the expansion of the universe. That's something like 70% of the sum total of the creation. That's a lot. And it's driving the whole universe to become bigger and bigger. It's certainly real. It's certainly important, very powerful. It's not in our sphere of activity. It's in the intergalactic sphere of activity. Who knows? Who knows? That's the real stuff. According to contemporary cosmology, it's real stuff, and it's very powerful. So the idea is that when you read what looks like a redundancy, and there's a certain attitude that people have towards this book because they've glanced at it here and there, well, it doesn't really make sense. And it is very redundant. It says things over and over again. Maybe it's like poetry, you should sing it and, have a mandolin playing at the same time. And who knows? They don't take it seriously. A person has to decide in life what to take seriously and what not to take seriously. Our whole philosophy is based on the holiness of this book and the fact that the book communicates to us fundamental ideas. And when you hear someone like Maimonides, was a great philosopher, explain it this way, you think, well, it seems like it says the same thing twice. There's more to it than it appears on the surface. That's, of course, I'm skipping an infinity of material just because I don't know, what it is. So now, verse 9, God said, let the waters of the heaven be gathered into one area, let the dry land appear. Water covers like 2/3 of the surface of the globe. Roughly 1/3 is uncovered. And he gave it their titles. Now, let's try this. God called to the dry land earth, to the gathering of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. Someone asked me, gee, Rabbi, you told us 6 minutes ago that the seas have an aspect of not good to them, threatening, punishing, preventing things from happening. So why does it say God saw that it was good? What's the it that he saw was good? The last mentioned item, the seas? Is that the it that was good? Okay, you're going to jump over and say it was the earth? I think there's another alternative. The whole situation, the constellation. The globe was covered with water. Now the waters are drawn off to one area. Dry land appears. And that new constellation of the earth, that situation is good. Not the item is good, but the circumstance is good. I think that's the plain understanding of it. And now comes a very, very famous item. 11. God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, herbage, which means vegetation, yielding seed, fruit trees yielding fruit, each after its own kind, containing its own seed on the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth vegetation, herbage yielding seed after its kind, and trees yielding fruit, each containing seed after its kind. So now, 12 describes what it did, and 11 describes what it should do. Are they identical? Why not?
The herbage, in the actual thing, the herbage yields seeds after its kind, and the fruit trees yield fruit, versus where it said it's the fruit trees are supposed to yield seeds after its kind. Oh wait, no, it said, no, sorry, the second.
No.
It said the second one too.
In 11 it says like earth sprout, but in 12 it says earth
Brought forth. Oh, okay. Even though brought forth could mean by sprouting, but it's okay. It is a change. What else?
It said fruit twice
Where?
in 11.
Yeah. What does it say about the trees in 11? Fruit trees yielding fruit. We could have thought, Isn't that redundant? We could have thought that. But that's what it says. Fruit trees. Now, what does it say in 12 that the earth brought forth? Trees bearing fruit, not fruit trees bearing fruit. So it sounds like not exactly what was being told happened. Not exactly. Everybody notices this. All the commentators notice it and talk about it. The earth didn't do exactly what the command was to be done. The Maharal, commenting on Rashi, explains as follows. The earth is not an agent. It doesn't have free will. It's not responsible for its actions. It can't be punished for things that don't happen. The message here is that a command coming from heaven addressed to earth cannot be completely fulfilled by earth. It can't. The gap between heaven and earth is too great. So this disparity between what was commanded and what happened illustrates the gap between heaven and earth. And he applies this to a very famous verse, the book of Ecclesiastes, Ein Adam Tzadik Ba'aretz Asher Ya'aseh Tov V'lo Yechta. And yes, for those who are listening to the recording, the translation, the verse does have the word Adam in it, even though it's often not quoted, but that's what it says. Ein Adam Tzadik Ba'aretz Asher Ya'aseh Tov V'lo Yechta means there's no person righteous in the earth who will do good and not fail, not sin. So there are a lot of things in that verse that need to be explained, but the Maharal asks, why does it say there's no person righteous in the earth who will do good and not fail? Are we any doubt where the people are? Are they in space stations, Are they floating around in space? Obviously, they're on the earth. Why is it mentioned on the earth? The answer is because it wants to explain to you why they will fail. They will fail because part of them is earthly. Part of it is made out of earth. That's where the failure comes from. So this idea of what happened to the earth here, it gives partial explanation for ourselves as to why we also fail. Now, the question that arises, if that's true, is why are we responsible for the failure if there's no way that we could prevent it? There's a lot of talk about that. I'm not sure I fully understand it, but I do know one thing. Even if a person fails, he can leave the world with a perfect record, even though he failed, because he can repair the failure. Tshuva enables us to repair the failure so that even though we failed, and in a certain sense you say it's written in the history book, no, that doesn't mar my record, because I can repair the record. So it isn't as if we're condemned to leave the world guilty. We're not condemned to do. It's set up so that there'll be failures, but we can repair the failures. There are questions with respect to that as well, but at any rate, that will suffice for what I want to accomplish now. And the other thing I want to ask you is this: were oak trees created? Last time I checked, oak trees don't have any fruit. What's called in Hebrew ilanei srak, trees that don't bear fruit, right?
Acorns are technically, botanically, I think that would be considered fruit. I think.
Some of them have only seeds. The seeds is not a fruit, right? Isn't it a little? I mean, we should ask, there are those who say that there weren't any non-fruit-bearing trees. All the trees bore fruit, which means even the oak trees bore fruit. And the result of the transgression of eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, some of them lost it. The whole world became degraded from that transgression of eating from the tree of knowledge. That's something which is in all of the literature. One of the degradations is the fact that some of them became non-fruit bearing, and when in the times of the Mashiach, it will go back to the way it was. Oh, you know, Beseva, Tamar and Erez, Yifrach. The Tamar has fruit, the Erez doesn't have fruit. And it will have fruit in the future. So if you pay careful attention, you get another message here. Kadosh Baruch Hu created trees to bear fruit. And it was only our failure that temporarily interrupted that.
But this was before the transgression.
Yes, that's right.
So this was hinting at the transgression even now, or?
No, because here, the hint here doesn't address this, because even what the earth brought forth was trees bearing fruit. Right?
Yes.
That point between fruit trees bearing fruit versus trees bearing fruit, you still get all the trees have fruit. Both of them agree to that. So they're not hinting yet that there'll be a time when trees won't bear fruit. Then, 14, God said, let there be luminaries in the firmament of the heaven to separate between the day and the night. And they shall serve as signs for festivals, days, years, and they shall serve as luminaries in the firmament of the heaven to shine upon the earth. So in other words, it's very interesting, the order here, right? First is the calendar. And the calendar which determines the dates, and the dates determine the festivals. That's the movement, day and night, and the monthly waxing and waning of the moon. Oh yeah, and for light also, right, which means that the light that occurred in the first 3 days is being replaced. After all, each day ends with, there was evening, there was morning, that means there was darkness, there was light, and that was the end of the day. Up until the fourth day, the heavenly bodies weren't there to give that light and to designate the time. Before that, the alternation with light and darkness was affected in some other way and determined the extent of the day. So this really, according to many, is not the creation of the heavenly bodies, it's the placement of the heavenly bodies in the heavens in such a way that they will determine light, project the light, determine daytime and nighttime. Now here, there's a parting of the ways. That means from day 4 on, you have sunrise and sunset. And you have that to mark the day. First 3 days didn't have sunrise and sunset because the sun wasn't there to rise and set. How shall we then conceive of the first 3 days? Without any further information, the last 3 days are sunrise and sunset, which is 24 hours. The first 3 days, you didn't have sunrise and sunset. So there are 2 ways to look at it, and you have to decide in terms of the text what would be a more natural way to read it. One way is to say, well, they're different. Who knows? How long was it where the alternation between lightness and dark on the first day, the second day, and the third day? Text doesn't give you a clue. 4, 5, and 6, it's clear, the sun was in the sky, sunrise, sunset, 24 hours. Or you could say they're all called days. The word day is used for all 6 of them. Why would you think that if it's the same word, that they're radically different? Those who wanted to say that the first 3, they want to say all 6 are eons, periods, unlimited stretches of time in which many, many things can happen, and you can reconcile now 13.8 billion, used to be 15 billion, you can reconcile that too, play with the numbers and you get whatever you want. 13.8 billion with 6 days, right? Just call them long ancient periods and let them be as long as you like. But surely if the last 3 are clearly 24 hours because of sunrise and sunset, the most natural thing to do is to say the first 3 were 24 hours also. That's why they're all called the same name. Otherwise, they shouldn't be called the same name. Only there, the alternation wasn't constructed in terms of the sun and the rotation of the earth. It was constructed in a different way. And that's the way the tradition almost unfailingly takes it, that all 6 days were 24-hour periods. And then it says at the end, 19, evening there was morning, 4th day, so God saw it was good. And here again is the situation is good. Now, okay, that's the time being. Then let the waters teem with teeming living creatures, fowl that fly above the, so forth and so on. The first place where animal life comes into existence is in the waters. So people think, well, this is not too different from the way we see the development of life, the order in which life comes into existence. First, vegetation comes into existence, and then animal life comes into existence. Water is somehow the source of that life. Yeah, probably water was the source of the vegetation. Also, it doesn't say that. If you think of water being the solvent which enables chemicals to come together and cells to develop, so and then multicellular creatures, including plants, but okay, we could leave that aside. And at least sunlight. The sunlight starts on day 4, whereas the vegetation starts on day 3. What about photosynthesis? Well, maybe the original light carried that also, maybe, although, it's not the same picture. What I'm hinting at is that we don't need this to be in the same order that the scientific world pictures as the development of life, because the scientific world is working with self-imposed blinkers on. Not that it's wrong to do that, but that's what they're doing. They're starting with an assumption about what kinds of processes they will recognize and what kinds of processes they won't recognize. They want observable processes, ones that can be explained on the basis of physics and chemistry, and then biology. And they want to explain everything in terms of those processes. Well, that's a project. And the world is full of projects. And nothing wrong with the project. Try to do everything with this and see how you do, and see if you're able to accomplish it. Our picture is that that's not how it happened. So we're not beholden to that project to describe how it happened. We have it happening by the basis of an intelligent agent who made it happen the way he wanted it to happen. So I think you have to have a delicate attitude towards science. There's nothing wrong. You know what it's like? It's sort of like sailboat races. They have big yachts and sailboat races, international sailboat races. You imagine a guy coming over saying, "I don't get it. You guys want to get there? You want to get there in a hurry? Use a speedboat with a motor. Why are you doing it in a sailboat?" The answer is because we're trying to demonstrate our skill at sailing. Sure, it's slower than a speedboat, but that's what we want to do. So, yeah, you want to explain the world using certain materials which you feel you understand or you can justify. Okay, good, fine. It's an interesting project. But be prepared to find that the project is going to be lacking resources, like the great revolutions in the last 500 years of science have shown that it's been lacking resources and serious problems even now. Be prepared for that. And you don't cast aspersions on someone else with a different point of view, coming from a different perspective. Your project has validity as a project, like getting there fast as possible than a sailboat has. You can get there faster with a motorboat, but you're doing it with a sailboat. So the same thing is true here. They've decided to work with certain types of explanations, certain types of agencies. And the truth is they changed their minds about the agencies, changed their mind about the explanations. when it fails, and then that probably will happen over and over and over again. So we don't have to look for a correspondence between the order of life and the process of life took place in Genesis as compared to what the scientific world says. They're different projects. There happens to be an overlap. Okay, there happens to be an overlap, but it's not something that we would regard as significant or interesting. And then at the end of the fifth day comes the sixth day. The sixth day has the earth bringing forth living creatures, animals, creeping things, beasts, and so forth and so on. It was so. Beast of the earth, its kind, and so that it was good. And then, 26, God said, let us make man. Now, this is the universal translation, but according to Maimonides, at least, it's not correct. Image in English is a visual word. If there's an image of it, you could take a photograph of it, or you could paint a picture of it. The word in Hebrew, tselem, has no visual connotations in the Hebrew language. The word for image would be tumunah, which is picture, or toar. Toar is the visible form of a thing. Tselem has no such association. Maimonides documents this in the first chapter of the guide. And then, after our likeness, that means similar to us. Maimonides says similarity is a very flexible term because, in particular, there's a verse where the prophet says, "I'm like a," I think the word is a pelican. I'm like a pelican in the wilderness. Oh, you are you? You have feathers. You stand on one foot. You have a bill. You fly with wings. You're like a pelican. Well, I'm lonely. I'm lonely like a pelican. That's the part that I have similarity to the bird. Nothing else, just that. Similarity is very loose and can be very superficial. What do the cup and the book have in common? They're both on the table. Aren't they? Both on the table? So that's what they have in common. Other than that, they have nothing in common. Right? So this is, I would say, at the outset, you need to understand what tselem means and what kind of likeness it is, what kind of likeness it has. They shall rule over the fish of the sea, birds, the sky, or animal, or all earth, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to be superior to and have control over everything else in the creation. And he created them that way. And he blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, birds, and everything else. This is what I'm telling you to do. And it's a blessing and a command. There's two verbs here. He blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply. And as my Rabbi Zatzal taught us, everything that you have here described, it's always described how it's going to reproduce. The idea of reproduction is built into the very fabric of the creation. And something's mentioned, there are lots of things, other things built in, but they are mentioned. That's mentioned, it means that recreation is something which is like participating in the purpose of the creation in the first place. I had distant relatives many years ago, because I'm very old. The acronym for this type of condition of life those days was called DINK, D-I-N-K. You know what that stands for? Dual income, no kids. Dual income, no kids. Of course, they didn't have a religious orientation. They were totally ignorant of these kinds of ideas. From our point of view, that would be like turning your back on one of the fundamental principles of the creation. It's for the grasses and the flowers and the plants and the fish and the birds and the animals and man. Reproduction is part of the purpose of the creation. That's a long story. There's a lot of implications of it. But that's what's being said here. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. I want you everywhere. I want you to control it and use it. Okay, there's more to be said. That's what he says to human beings. And there's another aspect of the creation story that comes in chapter 2. We'll pick that up tomorrow. But yeah.